I've been photographing celebrities for 40 years. And although when you go to dinner party, everyone's interested in David Beckham or Ewan McGregor or whoever it is I happen to have photographed, Gillian Anderson, say. Although there is this prurient kind of interest in celebrity, and our world is consumed with an obsessive need to know what they're like, ultimately that work doesn't really mean very much to me. It's my personal projects that I derive a richer and more lasting sense of satisfaction from making. This project is something that I've not really talked about. And it's a project that came from a friend who moved in next door to me. There was a house at the end of the canal and it was derelict. It looked like it was haunted. There's an old lady who lived in there, and apparently she used to sort of shit into a bucket and then hurl it out the window. And there was rhubarb growing in the garden, and all the windows were like blacked out. And she only lived in one part of this property. I used to walk past with my dog, and Marco would go in there, and I'd say, get out, you know. And then one day, the house was sold. The old lady must have died, and the house was put on the market. I think it sold at auction, and this guy Patrick bought it. He knocked on my door, and we were roughly the same age. He was very interesting. He'd lived all over the world. He'd been married twice. When I heard that he'd been married and had stories to tell, I interviewed him for my On Divorce project. And whilst I was doing that, he told me that he'd lived with suicidal thoughts. That was something that kind of galvanized the idea of doing a project about that subject, about, and it's something, some people don't like the term, but suicidal ideation. So I interviewed him, and then I've interviewed several people, and they've all become friends. So much of what we know about suicide is informed by the people that get left behind. You know, the puzzled relatives, the angry friends who feel that there's a degree of cowardness in the decision that was made. We never actually hear from people who live with those thoughts on a daily basis, how they live with those challenges, and how they sometimes can, with a bit of luck, reach a better place. And with that in mind, the project's called The Darkest Hour, as in the darkest hour before dawn. So Patrick suggested that I come round for a beer, some wine, some cheese. It's very middle class, very sophisticated. And I went round there and I said to him, can I interview you for my book? So I did. I videoed the interview, and he was incredibly candid and open. And we immediately embarked on this friendship, which involved, when I was round at his house, squash. I noticed there was a squash racket in the corner of the room and asked if he played. And we went from having an exploratory game, because you don't know whether you're going to be at the same sort of standard, and it's quite an unforgiving sport, to realizing we were almost exactly the same level. Anyway, we were exactly the same standard, and we started playing 2, maybe 3 times a week. I mean, it became an obsession, and this went on for a year. But I did notice that he was a troubled character. Although he was 6'4" and incredibly handsome and accomplished, he told me that he had bipolar, and he suffered from depression, and he'd worked for the Samaritans as to field calls and help people. He was an interesting and lovely man, a funny man, an intelligent man. And he also said that he'd moved 25 times in the last 25 years. So it wasn't a surprise when he announced that he was having a party because he'd found another place and he was going to be moving there. And as quickly as he came into my life, he left. Then a few months later, on the same day as I got a call from my sister saying my mum had had a fall and that would eventually lead to her death, an hour later, I got a call from Abby, my ex, telling me that Patrick had taken his life. He'd hung himself in the woods. And it made me reflect on the choices that we make, how I'm probably lucky in some respects that I delude myself that things are better than they are. I'm constantly seeking solace and consolation. So something really bad can happen, and I say, I'm like the football coach. I say, well, this is a learning experience. We move on. We come back stronger. This is actually what I wanted to happen. I wanted to not get that job, or whatever. Whereas some people, they're not like that. They're predisposed to melancholy. And Patrick was like that. And I remember on one particularly grueling game of squash, I sort of jokingly said to him, don't think I'm going to give you the kiss of life when you get a heart attack. And he lifted up his shirt, and tattooed on his chest was, "Do not resuscitate." The Darkest Hour will be exhibited at Photo North from the 11th to the 13th of April, and Fred and I will be there. It's a project that means a great deal to me. I guess you could say that I dedicate it to Patrick, really, and our friendship. And to finish, I'm going to read this excerpt from Dave. Each person writes. I interviewed them and then wrote from their perspective a testimony. I first experienced depression when I was 16 or 17. As the youngest of four, I felt an abrupt and overwhelming loneliness when my older brother left for university. A deep sadness settled over me. In time, the unease and anxiety faded, and for a while life felt normal. I went to university, got married, followed the expected path. The first time I felt truly suicidal was toward the end of my student years. My wife and I were both studying, money was tight, and I had just finished my MSc, searching for work. Then she told me she was pregnant. Believing it wasn't the right time for us, she chose to have an abortion without involving me in the decision. The quiet hum of stress and anxiety morphed into something darker. I was devastated. One night, I dreamt I was drifting on an ice shelf, slowly slipping into a cold, black sea. Death was inevitable. I woke up feeling an immense and terrifying relief. I went to the doctor and started medication for my depression. I don't think it will ever fully leave me. The anxiety lingers. I exist in a cycle, sometimes up, sometimes down. But when I'm down, it's different. I have flashes, sudden intrusive thoughts of driving into a tree or falling with a noose around my neck. I've never acted on them, but surely others must have these thoughts too. Medication helps. Managing it all is essential. Exercise, yoga, routine. Eventually, my marriage ended. Now I'm with an incredible woman, and things have gotten better.